Last year was the worst on record for Israeli attacks on Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, and they've been intensifying since the war on Gaza began. Palestinians in the West Bank have also carried out several attacks on Israelis. So where could all this violence lead? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. While the eyes of the world have been focused on Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, over in the occupied West Bank, the sites of Israeli weapons have been trained on an increasing number of Palestinian targets. Shootings of innocent civilians have nearly become a routine signature of Israeli military raids, with children among those killed and injured. Refugee camps have been hit by airstrikes, while settlers have openly attacked Palestinians with arms provided by Israel. Palestinians from the West Bank have launched isolated attacks on Israelis too. So how dangerous is this situation, and what's Israel's political and military strategy for the West Bank? We will be discussing all this with our guests in a few minutes, but first this report from Kulthum Sharif.
Another day, another raid. Baha Abu Ras describes the moment Israeli soldiers marched into a store in Dura.
He told the workers to go, and he told me that he will use me as a human shield. He said the young people shouldn't hurl stones. You will walk in front of me.
The impact of Israel's war on Gaza is being felt in the occupied West Bank. Israeli raids have risen dramatically since October the 7th, with incursions, curfews, arrests and killings happening nearly every day. The Palestinian Health Ministry says more than 350 people have been killed in the territory during the past 3 months. The Israeli military has also detained nearly 6,000 Palestinians. Many say they are under attack too.
We are far a bit from Gaza, and there is no October the 7th here, but we are being killed every day. We are being killed every single day. Either in Hebron, either in Jerusalem, either in Jenin, in every part of our country, we are being killed. It's a genocide.
Palestinians in the occupied West Bank are also fighting another battle: rising violence by Israeli settlers. The UN has raised an alarm, and the US president and some European leaders have condemned the aggression.
Lack of accountability for unlawful killings remains pervasive, as does impunity for settler violence, in violation of Israel's obligations as the occupying power to ensure safety of Palestinians in the West Bank.
Even before October the 7th, right-wing Israelis, including government ministers, made provocative incursions at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the occupied East, in breach of standing agreements. Palestinians praying at one of Islam's most sacred sites have also been beaten by the Israeli military. Israel says its war on Gaza began after the Hamas attack in October. Since then, Palestinians living nearly 90 kilometers away have come under more Israeli attacks, the latest in decades of violence against them. Kulthum Sharif, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
The heightened tension in the occupied West Bank follows a recent pattern of increasing violence. According to the UN's Humanitarian Affairs Agency, 507 Palestinians, including 88 children, were killed by Israelis there in the last year. That is the most on record for a year since the agency began collating figures in 2005. 36 Israelis were killed by Palestinians in 2023. That is also the highest number for a year since records began. Since October the 7th, more than 4,212 Palestinians have been injured, 637 of them children in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. A third of those injuries came from live ammunition fired by Israeli forces. Let's take the discussion right to Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, from where all three of our guests are joining us. Mustafa Barghouti is Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative, that is a Palestinian political movement. Walid Habbas is with the Palestinian Forum for Israeli Studies, or MADAR, and Bushra Khalidi is policy lead for the UK charity Oxfam in the occupied Palestinian territory and Israel. A very warm welcome to all of you. Mr. Barghouti, I'll start with you. The UN says that Palestinians are living in constant terror of the discriminatory use of Israeli state force and settler violence against them. Can you paint us a picture of life in the occupied West Bank?
Well, of course, what's happening in the West Bank is bad, and as horrible as what's happening also in Gaza Strip. But what we are subjected to here is, especially since the 7th of October, is Israel's violation of every international law. Every Israeli army soldier, every Israeli policeman, every Israeli settler feels that they have a license to kill, and they can do any atrocity to any Palestinian, any harassment to any Palestinian. The result is very drastic. I mean, since the 7th of October, I think we've lost more than 540, since the beginning of last year, we've lost about 540 Palestinians. Since the 7th of October, we had so many Palestinians killed. At least 22 Palestinians were killed directly by Israeli settler terror. And Israel now is arming the Israeli settlers in a very big way. And these settlers have been attacking Palestinian communities, conducting also acts of ethnic cleansing. No less than 30 Palestinian communities have been evicted from their homes by Israeli settlers' terror. But the situation is even worse than that. The whole West Bank has been divided in 224 clusters, or ghettos, if you want, divided by no less than 650 military Israeli checkpoints, many of which have become stations for harassment and sometimes stations where Palestinians would be shot at and killed. The settlement expansion is growing at a rate that is unprecedented. The Israelis are arresting people so widely. We didn't see that since maybe the first Intifada. More than 5,350 Palestinians have been arrested in the West Bank since the 7th of October. That brought the number of Palestinians in Israel jails to more than 8,000. And on top of that, the prisoners in Israeli jails are subjected to terrible harassment, torture, and oppression, which led to the killing of at least 7 Palestinian prisoners since the 7th of October, while they've been tortured.
Mr. Barghouti, thank you very much for laying the situation out for us, and we will be discussing all of those points in more detail. Mr. Habbas, if I can come to you, even before October 7th, as we've been reporting, the UN said that 2023 has been the deadliest year for Palestinians in the West Bank. Why has Israel increased its raids and violence in the occupied West Bank?
Yes, of course, it has been the deadliest year, even before 7th of October. Actually, we should remember that in December 2022, a new Israeli government was established, and this was a very far-right wing government. Two important things happened concerning the West Bank. First, Smotrich, who is considered the extremist figure in this government, became the second minister in the Israeli defense minister, and he became responsible for the whole West Bank and also the Kugat and the civil administration. And he, of course, represents the settlers inside the West Bank, and he has a vision to arrive to 1 million settlers by 2030. A lot of changes have been happening in the West Bank, especially in the West Bank, since the beginning of 2023.
Okay, so you see the changes as a result of Israel having the most far-right government that there's ever been elected in the country. But what is it that you think that they are trying to do?
Yes, so the Israeli agenda escalated in 2023. It did not begin by the establishment of this government. However, Israel since 2014 has halted any political negotiations with Palestinians, and it has been well known for everybody, the announcements of the Israeli governments that Area C should be annexed to Israel, and that the Palestinian Authority operating inside Area A and B should be designated as a non-political entity, only governing, administrating the civilian affairs of Palestinians. This is a very huge shift in the last decade that arrived its momentum in 2023. So Israel was trying since the beginning of that year to expand the settlements and also to improve the conditions of the settlers in order to annex them administratively, but also to establish all facilities for the settlers.
Right.
This demanded a shift in the practices of the Israeli government towards the Palestinians and towards their lands.
And certainly we have seen a great expansion of Israeli settlements, which are, of course, illegal under international law. Ms. Khalidi, let me bring you in now on that Israeli activity across the occupied West Bank and the raids that, we have been focusing on. What kind of impact are they having, humanitarian impact are they having on the people who live in the West Bank, especially given the great destruction that we often see accompanying these raids, the destroying of roads, of very important infrastructure, of power lines, of water supply?
I mean, I think what we're seeing and what we've been seeing in the West Bank is,
yes,
and in Gaza, I think that we have to make the comparison is, very similar policy of forcible displacement, of demolitions, of killing with impunity and no accountability, both children and unarmed men and women, with record numbers on the rise every single year since the UN has been monitoring those numbers in the last 20 years here in the OPT. The impact of closures, of military raids, of unlawful detentions and arrests, of demolitions and forcible displacement of communities is first a big impact on the economy. So essential agricultural activities are drastically reduced. There's loss of income. We've got 200,000 Palestinians who are unable to work in Israel, who used to have permits to be able to work in Israel. We have 50% of salaries being paid because of no money, being received by the Palestinian Authority, and therefore civil servants are not being paid. Agriculture is a major economic sector for the Palestinian economy. It's crucial livelihood for thousands, and the inability to harvest has also an impact on local economy. It's not yet seen, but we will see the impact on the economy in the upcoming months and year. Actually, according to the Palestinian Farmers Union, this year, Palestinian farmers were only able to harvest 50% of their produce this year because of collective punishing policies imposed by Israel post-October 7 that already existed, but have just escalated and been heightened. It also has actually an impact on our fragmentation. We're unable to visit each other as families, as employees and colleagues. We can't, freely travel from one city to the other in the OPT. That has a huge impact on the psychological and kind of cultural fabric of Palestinian society. And psychological toll. Children are unable to go to school normally in Palestine because they have to cross checkpoints. You can imagine what impact crossing a checkpoint to go to school has on a child. From little age, this is something that's normalized to him. Actually, yesterday, a 3-month-old baby died at a checkpoint because they were refused passage by the Israeli soldiers. And these are, stories that we hear of women unable to cross a checkpoint.
Absolutely.
And having to deliver at the checkpoint. This is a daily reality for Palestinians.
Mr. Barghouti, Ms. Khalidi has really laid out the economic impact, the social impact of what's been happening in the occupied West Bank. She also mentioned collective punishment. What would you say the political impact so far has been on the Palestinian political scene? We've seen recent polls by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research showed that 44% of people in the West Bank support Hamas, up from just 12% in September, and that the and 92% of people want President Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, which administers many parts of the occupied West Bank, to resign.
Yes, there are reasons for that. But in general, you have to understand that Palestinians, after witnessing the failure of Oslo process for 30 years, and after seeing that Israel deprived the Palestinian Authority from any authority whatsoever, the Israeli army is invading all cities, which are supposed to be under the Palestinian Authority security control. They have no respect to the Palestinian Authority. They deprived it not only from security control in cities, but more than that, they deprived the Palestinian Authority from the ability to control its own revenues, which are paid not by donors or by Israel. They are paid by us, the Palestinian citizens, the taxes that are the main revenue of the Palestinian Authority. Even that Israel is controlling, and it is actually conducting an act of piracy, depriving the authority from these resources. So practically, the people watched during the last 30 years and waited for the result of the so-called the peace process, the two-state solution, the Oslo process, the Oslo agreement, and nothing happened except more occupation, more settlements, and more aggression, and more killing of Palestinians. So the people don't have trust in this policy of the Palestinian Authority, and they don't have trust in the so-called Oslo agreement. They want an alternative, and people support resistance. That's why you see this shift in the polls, because Israel made the Palestinians think that it understands only the language of force. But if we want to look at the overall political context of why Israel is doing that, it's very clear. The Zionist movement was based on two principles: annexing the land, taking the land by force, and they managed to do so by occupying us. But the other aspect is to get rid of the Palestinian population, which they couldn't do, regardless of the fact that 7 million Palestinians are still abroad, refugees deprived from the right of return to their homes. The number of Palestinians on historic Palestine is today equal to Israeli Jewish people. For Israel, there is one of three options. Either they should accept a two-state solution, which they don't want to accept because they want to maintain the annexation of the West Bank, or they should accept one democratic state, which means equal rights for all people, and that means that that state cannot be Jewish only as they want. Or the third option, which this Israeli government is opting for, and that is ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. And had they succeeded in Gaza in conducting ethnic cleansing, they would have moved to the West Bank and repeated the same thing. So that's why Palestinians now understand one thing: they have to struggle for their resilience. Right. Through their resilience, they have to struggle and stay on their land, because without that, they have no future.
And Mr. Habbas, do you think that there is a role for the Palestinian Authority in the Palestinian struggle? There is so much talk, you know, the United States, for example, wants the Palestinian Authority to play a crucial role in the future of any possible two-state solution. But do you think that what Mr. Barghouti is saying, is it Israel that has rendered the Palestinian Authority ineffective, or does the Palestinian Authority also have to carry some of the blame?
Yes, I think it has to carry some of the blame. I want to answer your question by elaborating on a significant point mentioned by Mr. Barghouti when he said that the Israelis want to get rid from the Palestinians. We call this elimination of the Palestinians, and the elimination is done by controlling them administratively. This has been done since 1967, and it has been done through an indirect colonial rule. Unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority is the entity which is positioned in this indirect colonial rule, taken this role. So in order for the Palestinian Authority to break away from the occupation, it should not only call for a Palestinian state or two-state solution, it should call for a decolonization of this occupation, which means...
But the Palestinian Authority calls for a two-state solution. It calls for a two-state solution.
Yes, but when we analyze this away from the political discourse, we can analyze that this is only a discourse for the population consumption. But in fact, we should analyze the mechanisms and the bureaucratic procedures that situates the Palestinian Authority de facto as part of the colonial regime. It is not about judging it politically or ethically. It's about talking about the mechanisms. If we disaggregate the Oslo Accords and read it line by line, we see that the sovereign in the West Bank is the civil administration or the Israeli soldiers, and part of this structure is the Palestinian Authority, which is taking administrative control of management control over the Palestinians. So I'm analyzing here the mechanisms that are in effect on the ground, and not judging the politics of the Palestinian Authority. So in order to opt for a two-state solution, we should break away from Oslo Accords. We have two divisions between the Palestinians. The first is between the West Bank and Gaza, between Fatah and Hamas. And the second division that nobody talks about is between the Palestinians inside Israel and the Palestinians in the so-called occupied territories. This division also should be eliminated in order to talk about emancipatory project.
All right. Ms. Khalidi, do you think that the Palestinian Authority should be playing a bigger role in protecting Palestinian civilians in the occupied West Bank? Can it be doing more?
I mean, it's important to set the scene that this is a military occupation, and Israel as an occupier has clear duties and obligations under international law, of which a paramount duty is to protect Palestinian civilians and provide them with basic necessities, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, and which they are not doing in both the West Bank and in Gaza, because in fact, on the contrary, they deprive Palestinians of access to land, of access to water, of access to natural resources. They impede our movement and put restrictions on our freedom of movement, and have revoked, for example, most permits that people had to access Israel, and all the closures that we were talking about. So I wouldn't even put the burden on the Palestinian Authority. I would put the burden on Israel in terms of protecting Palestinian people and providing in line with their international obligations. One more point I want to make. This fragmentation of Palestinian society has led to isolation of communities and the inability to create an alternative for Palestinians. This is what this policy of control and division and oppression has created, is that there is no other alternative for Palestinians than this authority.
All right.
And it's been very difficult for also to have, future or forward thinking, when we're unable to organize together.
Sure. Mr. Barghouti, when Ms. Khalidi was talking about how Israel's obligations and rights under international law, it hasn't been abiding by those for 70 years. It's not going to begin to do that now, is it? The UN says that there is a risk of annexation, Israel annexing parts of the occupied West Bank. Whose responsibility is it now to make sure that that doesn't happen? Do you think that the international community will allow that if that's where things are headed?
Well, who is the international community? That is the big questions. Is the international community are the people who are now demonstrating all over the world, demanding the end of the Israeli attack on Gaza and the war on Gaza, and demanding that Palestinians would be free? Or is it the state, the United States government and the government of Britain and some other Western governments who are allowing Israel to be impunitive and above the international law? Israel will not change its course unless it is subjected to sanctions. And if the world does not continue to use double standard, look, Russia was put under 111. The world put 11,000 sanctions on Russia in 1 month because they said it occupied parts of Ukraine. In our case, they are supporting the occupier. So this double standard has to change. And Israel will not be able to achieve peace unless it stops its nature of being a settler colonial project. They want to annex the occupied territories, and the world is not punishing them for that. And I think only through boycott, divestment, sanctions, as was done to the apartheid system in South Africa, the situation could be changed.
And we have seen an increase. We have seen an increase in support for the BDS movement that you mentioned since the war on Gaza began. Mr. Habbas, if I can bring you in there, the US took measures, implemented measures against settlers, Israeli settlers who were involved in violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. Do you think that that could expand, that those measures, those sanctions could expand, and that could other countries do the same? Are they meaningful in any way?
I don't think they are, rightful in their sanctions about settlers, because the United States is backing the Israeli government, and the Israeli government is building the settlements inside the West Bank. So making this differentiation between lawlessness by settlers in the West Bank and that they are should be outlawed and should be sanctioned, but on the same line, the U.S. is backing Israel as supporting it and also supporting its project inside the West Bank. So this makes no sense. We don't expect that sanctions should come from the United States. We expect that the free nations should gather all together, support the Palestinians. We should also remember that under the international law, whenever people are under a colonial regime or under a military occupation, then it is their right to resist and use any type of resistance against this occupation.
We have less than a minute left, and I'd like to ask Ms. Khalidi a very quick last point. After everything you've heard, what do you think needs to happen to de-escalate the tensions in the occupied West Bank?
How to de-escalate tensions?
Yes.
Measures to prevent settlers. One is not a measure that would de-escalate any tension. If anything, I feel like they would, probably be retributive here in the West Bank with the sanctions imposed on them abroad. Listen, it's very, we as a humanitarian community, we have been saying ending the occupation, ending the siege on Gaza are two measures that would de-escalate tensions. And accountability is clear. Is impunity is what has gotten us here. Accountability, and we have plenty of judicial and non-judicial mechanisms to ensure that perpetrators of violence are held accountable, and they have not been.
Bushra, Khalidi in Ramallah, thank you very much for that. I'm sorry that we ran out of time, but thank you to all of our guests, Mustafa Barghouti in Ramallah and also Walid Habbas in Ramallah. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Elizabeth Puranam, and the whole team here, bye for now.